Okay. First, let
Woo!
me greet everybody. Let me welcome everybody to a conversation that we're going to have with Kirsten Johnson about her wonderful, beautiful film, Dick Johnson is Dead, which is currently a hot item on Netflix. As
Hmm.
you all know, that's Kirsten, who's beaming in from a warm but rainy day, a Wednesday afternoon in Washington, D.C. I'm Alan,
Correct.
beaming in from a warm, rainy Wednesday in New York, although I'm in my basement workshop, so you'd never know. And many people also watching from London, where I understand they're past, it's 7 o'clock, give or take, and it was a warm, rainy Wednesday in London as well. Just by way of introduction, amidst all the rain and the craziness of this coronavirus pandemic, we're now all guests in the virtual kitchen of Dock House. How about sitting at the kitchen table of Dock House, which is a really good place to hear two personal filmmakers talk about personal filmmaking, among many other things. And also, just before we begin, if any of you have any questions for Kirsten, at any point, use the chat device, and at the end of this conversation, we'll bring in audience questions. So, welcome, Kirsten.
Hi, Alan. It's great to
Hi.
be at the kitchen table with you.
Yeah, yeah. Let me just say that I think I was invited to lead this conversation by the nice people at Dock House because they did a Venn diagram and they found that two of my films, one, Nobody's Business, a film that I made about my father, uh, who uh, who let me make a film about him despite the fact that he thought it was the craziest idea in the world. And then a film I made, First Cousin Once Removed, which is a film about my cousin Edwin Honig, a poet and translator, who I chronicled his metamorphosis through Alzheimer's. Both subjects, both big themes are woven uh, into Dick Johnson is Dead. Also, my films intersect with many other important themes of your films, like fathers and parents and love and family and memory and dementia and life and death and mortality and time passing and
Um,
storytelling. And like your films, they're also serious and equal and playful in equal measure. But the first question that everyone's wondering, and I'm certainly wondering, is how's your dad?
well, thanks for asking, Alan. And you should know that I thought about so many of your films throughout the making of this film. And, you made Nobody's Business in 1996, and I think I saw it that year or the year after it came out in Paris. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, how would someone be brave enough to make a film about their father when their father didn't think a film should be made about them? It's come back to me often in the making of this project. But I came down to DC to visit my dad. He's now in a dementia care facility. And this morning I went with my brother, which was actually incredibly helpful. It was easier to be with my brother and my dad than I visited my dad a few days before, and dad, while he was really happy to see me, he was also saying, please take me home, please take me home. And so today, both me and my brother sort of stood there at our 6 foot separated distance and said to him, please take us home, please take us home. And my father really laughed. I mean, he's in general very comfortable where he is in this place and being well taken care of and is happy when I talk to him on the phone. But I think when he sees us, he's like, the pandemic isn't a good reason for me to be here. Let's go. Your car's right there. Let's get out of here. So it's remarkably, like, ongoingly challenging and painful to, watch someone sort of slip through your fingers and slip through the world. Um, it was deep. I was trying, and I like don't want to be patronizing to him. So I was like, he's like, why can't I go? And I was like, well, you're up all night long, and if I'm taking care of you, I can't sleep. So I was thinking about this morning too, because you've made a film about insomnia and whether we really need sleep or not, but I know I need it. And while we were making Dick Johnson is Dead, there was a couple of months where dad was really waking up a lot and I was barely sleeping, and we were trying to finish the film. And I just started to have like heart palpitations because I was just like, how can I do this? I'm not sure I can.
Right. but he still knows who you and your brother are, right? You still
Yeah,
have that
yeah,
connection.
yeah, and I read him
But it's,
another review of the film and told him about an award that we're nominated for, and he's enjoying it. It's an ongoing enjoyment for him, the film.
that's great. That's great. That's great. Um, One thing I noticed, I don't know if anyone's asked you this, but before the film is shown on Netflix, they have one of these, it's not a warning, maybe it is a warning. It
Yeah.
says thematic elements and macabre images. Have you, what do you think of that? Because that, I could imagine some horror film. It's not a horror film, it's a love story, you know?
Yeah, I don't know, I was a little proud to have something that needed a warning on it.
Right, right. I don't think they're referring to the Halloween images in the film, by the way, you
Yeah.
know,
Well,
but
I think aging is macabre in some ways for all of us when we
yeah, I,
experience it.
I guess. I looked up the meaning of macabre. It's disturbing and horrifying because of involvement with or depiction of death and injury. So I guess it qualifies.
Well,
But
I mean, I think the truth is, Alan, there are people who are afraid to see this movie because they or someone they loved has experienced a traumatic accident.
right,
And, that was one of my worries, honestly, when I was first making the film. It's sort of like, what's it going to be like for someone whose father really did fall down the stairs to watch this movie and then sort of watch us laugh and pick him up again. There's an irreverence in this movie that could be seen as something that is unsympathetic or disrespectful or you know sacrilegious even. um, I will say that at one of the early Sundance screenings, there was a woman who came up to me and said, my father died after falling down the stairs.
well,
And it was just it was just like, oh, she's like, I love the movie. So we can't know how our work is going to affect other people, can we?
right. But but the film has a smile on its face from beginning to end. You know, it's
This
so
one does.
yeah, yeah. Well, no, but the film is so playful and loving. It's unpredictable, even a bit goofy at times, right? But that's part of its charm, you know. And it's a tender humor in the film. It's a transcendent humor about a very difficult subject. And comedy is obviously one way. Humor is one way that allows us to transgress, that allows us to break boundaries and talk about taboo subjects, And I think, you know, your film does so in a rather beautiful and, as I said, tender way. I mean, we're born, we're die, and in between shit happens, and
Sure does.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I just knew going into this project that I actually was incapable of facing my father's dementia um, in a repeat version of the way that we'd faced my mother's dementia, just because it was so painful. And I cried so much when my mom was ill, and I just couldn't do it again. So this film gave me an outlet to like attempt to make comedy of this. Was just this sort of holy grail. I've never made a funny movie before, and it's like it's a craft. Trying to figure out how to make it work became this wonderful pleasure.
yeah. I mean, your film is filled with what I think of as cinematic sleight of hand. You know,
Mm.
it's things are not always what they seem, but whatever happens, Dick Johnson is always very much alive and he's always in good hands. So there's an edginess and a foreboding, a lot of foreboding, but everything's going to work out in the end. Like when the air conditioner falls at the beginning, everyone winces, but when he gets up and is escorted away, everyone breathes a sigh of relief, and that in a way is a template for how to understand how the film will evolve over, one of the
Yeah.
constructs of the film.
I mean, except for the fact that everything doesn't turn out in the end, right? Like people do die
Yeah,
and dementia does sort of, pull people apart. So
yeah,
that sort of tension between the way in which a suspense in a movie, like this person could fall at any moment feeling, was something that it was really interesting to play with, because in some ways that's what I was experiencing as a daughter, of like, we don't know when this is gonna
yeah.
turn.
right. But in the meantime, at a certain point, it occurs to the viewer, gee, how how many ways is Dick Johnson going to die, you know, and become resurrected or resurrect himself? And so I suppose one question you've possibly been asked a lot is, how did you decide all the different ways to kill
Mm,
him in the film?
yeah. Well, so I mean, just so you know, in a certain way, like decide was an elusive word
Understood.
in this process.
Yeah.
We definitely had wishes, and then we had to sort of cope. Uh, and I love that about this process because it really, more than any film I've ever worked on, taught me to let go and to enjoy that it would not be as I imagined it, that nothing would be as I imagined, but that wouldn't impede me from imagining. And so, when I first came up with the idea of like, we're going to kill him over and over again and use stunt people and we're going to keep doing it until he really dies, I was crazy. I was like, we're putting dad on an ice floe. We're going to take him to Hong Kong and throw him out of a building. We're going to catch him on fire. I want to go to Ghana and see those amazing, hand carved caskets and put him in one of those. I was like, woo, we're going all around the world. And, the very first time I tried a death, which is the death at the bottom of the stairs in our house, it was just me and my dad at home. And I was like, Dad, can you just like lie down at the bottom of the stairs so we can see what that looks like? And just watching him being willing to do that with me, but also to see, his 86-year-old body like trying to get down the ground. And I was like, ooh, that doesn't look very good. Just sort of felt like bad film school movie. And I was like, what am I doing? What am I asking my father to do? And I was very sort of ashamed of my own like lack of cinematic capacity. And I was just like, this is pathetic. Like, why am I making this like ridiculous, absurd little movie? Um, and then I talked to this orthopedic surgeon, and he was sort of, don't you know, like a lot of people, most people, it's just a fall that takes them out, right? It's
Yeah.
either their hip is broken and they fall, or they've had a stroke and they fall. And suddenly I just became so moved by that idea of like, we're vertical. We get to be vertical for a lot of our lives. And then at a certain point, we just keel over and we become horizontal again.
Yeah.
And so the sort of modesty of the deaths became more interesting to me, of like, it's most likely my dad's going to trip and fall. Like that's the most likely thing that's going to happen to him, but that might kill him.
Yeah. Well, that particular fall, um, again, it's a sleight of hand because he didn't need to fall. The camera either moves suddenly or and then you use the sound effect, for the actual thump of the fall, which
Yeah.
tells, which is punctuates the moment,
But Alan, to be clear, like, we brought this wonderful stunt coordinator in, Kemp Curley, who's like, helped people like jump over dozens of buses with a motorcycle in Grand Canyon and, like can really deal with real physical risky stunts. And he and I and dad were out in the street in New York, and Kemp was just sort of showing me like the camera moves that I could do to make it seem like dad was falling. And dad misunderstood and just fell.
right, right, right.
And so that sort of realization of your protagonist has dementia, um,
Sure.
and how do you cope with that in every moment? That you can't just casually say, we will, okay, this will be the part where dad falls, and you and everyone else knows that it's not, we want you to really fall, but he doesn't.
Right.
So coping with that reality in relation to also trying to create a sort of cinematic sleight of hand was actually deeply complicated and at times really risky for dad.
He doesn't know his boundaries. He's not,
Yeah,
you're not always sure he heard it properly, or even when you're out on the street with him and the blood that's draining, the fake blood, if you will, that's
yeah,
draining from his shirt, it's too cold. I mean, he could,
yeah.
have some, but the film also has these moments of foreboding. What even, he's walking, he could be walking down the street. There's a scene in the subway station on West 4th Street
Yeah.
where, gee, I don't know, is the train gonna collide with him? Is he
Yeah.
gonna fall on the tracks? I mean, or
Yeah.
anytime he's in a car, it's this edginess,
Right.
that
Right.
that is very, and by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's sitting outside of a building in New York City, and he just gets in the car and a truck goes by with a loud
Yeah.
honk. Now, that was one moment in the film where I felt, gee, that probably really happened, but maybe not.
Oh, Alan, I love it. You're finally the first person to identify that. We totally did that with VFX. There
Like,
was no truck.
wow, wow, wow.
You
Okay.
know, which was so fun, right? To get to sort of go backwards into situations and make the worst almost happen.
Right, right. Oh, I didn't, yeah. Because to me, that's like, that could happen to any of us,
Of
just
course.
imagine. Oh,
And there were many times that it did that I certainly didn't capture on film, right? So we had to construct it. We had to make it.
yeah, yeah. Which brings me, if you'll allow, to the metaphor of the double fudge chocolate cake.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say that brings me to my workshop. That's where I want to go. Is there a chocolate cake in there somewhere?
No. But
I love seeing it back.
if I may, I
Yes.
love the fudge chocolate cake because it's his indulgence and it's his love. And
Hmm.
he let us know with a really beautiful intertitle on the cover of the book that he had 3 or 5 pieces of it the day before he had his heart attack. So we learn to make that association, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we see him, and we'll talk about, I mean, he's eating fudge in heaven. We're going to talk about heaven in a little while, but we see him eating cake with his grandchildren. We see him indulging in his love of chocolate cakes. His friends
Yes.
cook a cake for him. So again, there's that edginess that he's doing something that could give him a heart attack, you know? And it made me realize how many of us tempt death in that way without, sometimes we know it and sometimes we don't know it, but every one of us watching has things that we do, whether it's not getting enough sleep or not getting enough exercise or sunlight or artists using toxic materials. Every one of us is dying a little bit every day because of something we do that we can't stop. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's
And I
part of
would
who we
and I
are.
would I would include loving in that.
Okay.
You
Okay.
know, I mean, it's so interesting. Both my brother and I, in the periods where we were taking care of my dad and he wasn't sleeping a lot, hence we weren't sleeping a lot. Both my brother and I started to have like heart palpitations, and I, called the cardiac doctor and said, is this okay? And they said, are you under stress, or is there any reason that you might be heartbroken? And I was like, yeah. But it's like I could feel my heart in my throat, in my arm. And I was like, wow, like I could have a heart attack from loving someone too much. But which I think is your chocolate cake analogy in
Yeah.
many ways, right?
Well, that's what leads
And
to
we have to do what we love. We have to take risks. And I mean, that's part of being a parent in a certain way, is that you're teaching your children how to, be independent and learn how to take risks and survive them. But you don't always know if you've got it right or if they've got it right. And none of us can know. And I think that edginess that the film engages in comes from the experience of both being a caregiver of older parents with dementia, but also being a parent of young children. And like, the streets of New York can be really scary if you got 2 2-year-olds.
absolutely. How are your kids, by the way? Everyone's good?
They're great. They're great, and they really participated in a lot of the fabulations and fantabulations of like, how are we going to kill grandpa?
Right.
And there's just time, like at Halloween even, that the two of them were just cracking me up with how they were able to play with death, which makes me really happy.
Right. Well, it's a good lessons, you know, to teach them in a certain way. Let me ask you, let's see, how do I want to go here? Let me ask you um, about when I made my film First Cousin Once Removed about my cousin Edwin, who was a poet.
Yes.
I started to think that there were different kinds of Alzheimer's, you know,
Yeah.
and that my cousin Edwin was experiencing what I called a poetic Alzheimer, a poet's Alzheimer's. He spoke, still made metaphors. He spoke in rhyme. His sentences were um, syncopated and had rhythm to them. And and then I started to think, there could be a musician's Alzheimer's and a bus driver's Alzheimer's. Whatever you spent your life doing, you bring some of that essence, some of that bearing to your how Alzheimer's or your dementia manifests. And I'm wondering about a psychiatrist's
Mm.
Alzheimer's. You know, I
I
mean,
so I
you
mean,
know,
in your movie with Edwin, it was so palpable how much he loved language.
yeah,
You know, that he loved to hear it and to play with it, and that he you could see him discovering the pleasure in putting certain words together and then sort of surprising himself with how absurd it sounded. And you could see like you understood more about who he must have been. Um, but I'll tell you, one night in the middle of the night, my dad woke me up, and he was sort of coming out of his room fully dressed in a suit, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was like, Dad, where are you going? And he said, there's a patient downstairs waiting for me. And I said, Dad, no, it's 3 in the morning. There's nobody down there. And he said, no, there's someone down there. And I said, Dad, what kind of patient would come for an appointment at 3 o'clock in the morning? And he said, someone who really needs me, Kirsten.
wow,
And he was so intent upon going and meeting this person's needs that I said, okay, let's go down. So we went down in the elevator, and the elevator opened, and he looked out at the lobby, and he just looked dismayed, and he looked at me and he said, there's nobody down here, is there? And I said, no. And he said, wow, it must be really hard to watch your own father lose his mind.
wow. See, that's one of the amazing traits. I'm sorry.
Right. And then he said, I guess it's time to get the little men with the ambulance to come and bring me out in a little white jacket. And then he said, but you're really gonna miss me. So he did this like amazing flip of thinking about the needs of the patient, then realizing what was happening with his own mind, then realizing how that must be affecting me, then making a joke out of it so we could both feel better. Like his self-awareness and capacity to flip like that, I think, is just remarkable. And he did that coming in and out of the psychiatrist's office, like going from a person who's having suicidal ideation to coming out and, making a joke, and then going back into the next person who has schizophrenia, like that back and forth between worlds. But I will say, like, unequivocally, my father's capacity to listen for what are the needs of the other person is manifest still in his dementia.
Yeah. I think it's very apparent. I mean, over decades, he knows how to listen, he knows how to observe, he knows how to empathize, and he's able to observe himself, right? And
Yeah,
he
that's the one.
and he's also he cuts through the bullshit. He knows he needs you. He knows, and he's strong enough to be vulnerable
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
acknowledge that.
My
And
father,
in a
my
way,
father always cried. He would cry when I left on a trip, and his line is, the eyes are dry, the organs cry.
yeah,
And I certainly, have gone to movies with him and seen him cry, and um, it's mattered to me to have a man in my life who could cry, it's been part of something that's I think helped me immeasurably.
yeah. Well, listen, I'm sure he had patients with different kinds of dementia over the years, but more importantly and more profoundly than anything, he experienced and endured your mother's dementia, which must have taught him, which not only gave him strength and understanding and compassion, but obviously that's part of his strength and his ability to be vulnerable, and part of his willingness and need and enthusiasm for trusting you. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah. I
lot.
mean, I think there's a lot there, and we really went through it together. I was much less willing to accept what was happening to my mom. I feel like I fought it every step of the way. It was sort of like, Mom, like, don't you've done. Whereas my dad, I think from the beginning, understood that it was a disease, and he had compassion for her. He was not angry at her for not being herself. I was, I was just like, how can I get her to be herself? And I think he saw me struggle with that. I think he was aware going into this that I was going to be in a same sort of death struggle with the loss of him. And so, it was sort of delicious the way he was like, yeah, go ahead and kill me. Because, like, I mean, we're mad at me for getting dementia. Let's just kill me. So his sort of ability to play around with contradictory states, that you can have love and anger, you can have envy, you can have frustration, you can have humiliation, all of those things. Like, he's unafraid of the range of emotions.
Right. Um, uh, Again, touching on your mother, by the way, the scenes with your mother in the film are incredibly powerful and tender, and they take your breath away. Um, your mother lives, I put that in quotation,
Yes.
her ashes are in that box on various shelves or mantle pieces. I would imagine that your father will be cremated as well, so that he can. Is that is that part of the
I'm
plan?
telling you, I mean, I really don't know what we're gonna do with 2 boxes of ashes. Like,
Right,
I've had a hard enough time figuring out what to do with one.
right, right.
But, this box of ashes, I remember so distinctly, the people coming, delivering them to the house, and my father was down, uh, at sort of our neighborhood shares access to a lake. And so my father was down at the lake, and they came and delivered the ashes. So I got in the car to, like, drive down to the lake to bring in the ashes. And I remember I came down this hill and I saw my father laughing and talking with these people in this ray of sunshine. And I was like, he doesn't need to see this box of ashes right now. And I just turned around the car and drove back up the hill. And I think that there's just been moments in my life where this box of ashes I've been like, okay, like, let's put her somewhere. Even for Dick Johnson Is Dead, we went and we found a spot that we were going to put her. And then I was like, I don't want to.
Yeah, yeah.
And but the first time in Camera Person that I saw the scene where Nels Bangerter, who cut the film, cut the shot of my mom's ashes with some footage of her, I really thought she was alive. Like, just for a second, I thought she'd come back to life. And that was my, like, aha moment of movies can do this. Movies can bring people back to life. And so that became, in the way that movies are time travel,
Sure.
that you can jump around in chronology, in past, present, and future, you can bring people back to life. Um, and I love this. I like the way you said lives. Like, I talked to a woman recently who, um, you know, someone else in the conversation said, well, my father's already dead. And the woman said, well, I still look forward to meeting him. She's like, there's all kinds of ways to meet dead people. And, she's like, think of any of your favorite authors or your favorite films. It's all the lives of dead people, but we get to meet them.
Right. Well, listen, having made, as you mentioned, Nobody's Business in 1996, anytime it's screened to this day, I hear and I happen to be there, I hear my father's voice, I see his face, I feel his energy. I mean, and you'll have the same experience with Dick Johnson Is Dead. He will always live for you in these ways, and his energy and his presence will live for, it's a kind of, through cinema allows a kind of immortality as well, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And was that part of why you made Nobody's Business, to keep him from dying?
Um, none, well, he wasn't about to die then, you
Yeah.
know? So
Yeah.
it was, I mean, I want to go down that rabbit hole, but, my father was the saddest person in the whole world to me at the time, the most compelling character. And I
Mm.
had thousands of questions I needed to ask him. And I realized if I didn't do it now or at that time, I wouldn't have a chance to, or I was
Yeah.
afraid I wouldn't. So I thought, you know, I mean, we'll talk, maybe that'll come up later in something else. If I can set up if you'll allow me to make a morbid joke.
Please. I love a morbid
Yeah,
joke.
yeah, yeah. So, it's a shocking scene at the beginning of the film in which your father is trying out the casket, you know.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we see him, or maybe that's him at the memorial. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. You know, someone's in the casket because he's both outside the room, and but it doesn't. That's part of the charm of the film. Maybe, maybe not. But I realized that if your father was going to be buried, then you might have had dug a grave site for him, but you
Mm.
didn't go there. And then you would have had to decide what to put on his tombstone.
Oh
And
yeah.
I know what it could have said on his tombstone.
Mm.
May I?
Please, I'm dying. I might have to make it.
Dick Johnson is dead. Okay, that's my morbid joke, right? Anyway, anyway, um, okay. Now that let's talk about heaven. Can we talk about heaven? Right?
Sure.
Um, so I guess just like how how did you decide all the different ways you might kill him?
Mm.
Um, how how the heaven that you propose, the heaven that you construct,
Mm.
is it is it a Seventh Day Adventist version of paradise or the
Mm.
afterlife?
Mm.
It, how did you construct it with the confetti and the slow mo, the popcorn and the fudge and the music and the dancing? I mean, just give us a little bit on how that got came to,
Yeah. Well,
please.
I worked with wonderful producers on this film, Katie Chevigny, Marilyn Ness, Maureen
Yeah.
Ryan. And at a certain point in this, they were saying like, do we have to keep killing him? Like, that thing that you were saying about, it's enough just to have him stand on the side of the tracks of a train and you imagine that he'll be killed. So at a certain point, we didn't need to keep killing him. And they kept advocating for like, can't we do something where he's really comfortable and enjoying himself? And I was like, yeah. And the other part of it was I was starting to feel the film was really small and diminished, and its colors were really depressing to me. My dad always wears a light blue shirt and khaki pants, and everything was sort of gray. And I'm this person who just loves color and maximalism and exuberance. And I was like, can we like get some air into this movie? Um, but heaven really came about dictated by my father's capacities. So, because I'm so interested in how time works, I was becoming increasingly interested in how the dementia related to the present moment, sort of that my dad is in the ever present. And Edwin was like this too, right? Where it doesn't matter what question has just been asked, it doesn't matter what's happening next. It's just in one sentence where time exists. And so suddenly it occurred to us that if we shot in super slow motion, we could stretch present time
Mhm.
so that, my father might do a quick smile and then say, where are we and what are we supposed to be doing? But shooting with a phantom camera, you could turn that into 3.5 minutes of smiling. And so suddenly we realized, and this is, I was obsessed with heaven as a kid. So within Seventh-day Adventism has this really elaborate and interesting relationship to the end times that are almost weirdly like they cribbed it from the Holocaust. They're sort of like the government's going to come for you and you've got to hide, and there's going to be the mark of the beast on some people, and but the idea is like there'll be these terrible end times in which our people will be persecuted, and then suddenly Jesus will come again. And at that time, the earth will be destroyed, and people will rise up from their graves, the people who are already dead, and the people who are still living, and everyone will go up to heaven. And so, it's all Book of Revelations, ideas. And I was fascinated by it as a kid. I was just like, what is an infinity? If I go to heaven when I'm 7 years old, do I have to stay 7 years old? Will my parents stay the same? Do I ever get to grow up? I just was on and on and on with like, what would heaven be? But there were all these sort of 1950s illustrations of beautifully dressed families standing in their own graves and Jesus coming in the sky. But it would be like, talk about morbid, it would be a scene of a whole cemetery filled with all these people had been woken up from the dead.
Wow.
And so that was like in my childhood imagination, right? And so what I started to do is gather these elements that were what would be in heaven. And also knowing that my dad might or might not have the capacity to do certain things. So it was like when I was trying to figure out like how will he see my mom there, I was like, well, we can't hire an actress to be my mom. We have to use a photo of my mom. And then suddenly I was like, oh, we can have other dead people there. We
Hmm.
can have masks. And maybe my dad won't be able to do something, but we can have a stand-in for him and he can wear the dad mask. And the person with the dad mask can dance. And so it just became this really fun, like push me, pull me of we find an element, but we don't know what will work. So we were choreographing a dance without knowing what music it would be played to because we were filming in slow motion. So it was like dancing and then composing music backwards to fit the dance. So it was really fun process, really fun process.
Well, imagine, you know, um, I thought of when I was thinking about the various heaven scenes which are woven throughout, it's also a chance for you to, you'll excuse the expression, to play God. You know, it's wish fulfillment, right? You're granting him wishes. He's like king of the universe. And
Yeah.
you're allowing him to reunite with your mother. They're dancing. You know, you're turning his toe stubs into real toes. And by the way, Jesus in person does it, right?
Yeah, why
There's a lot
not?
of people who would like Jesus to like intervene for them, but he gets Jesus's personal attention for that, you know?
Oh,
So
yes.
that's like serious, that's like, you know, big
Oh,
time
yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Well, so I love that you figured that out, that I'm playing God. I hadn't figured that out, but I was a really believing little kid. I believed in God, in Seventh day Adventism, and I very specifically believed a Bible verse that says, God knows your thoughts before you think them. And I was like the way I was like deeply perplexed by the idea of infinity. I was totally obsessed with this idea. And I was a little mad. I was like, I want one thought of my own that God can't get to. So as a child, I will say that I was constantly trying to beat God to my own thoughts.
Wow.
And when I was a young woman, I would often finish other people's sentences for them and until many friends and several lovers told me that this is a very annoying habit, right? But my what how I had trained my brain was to try to anticipate what someone was going to think or feel or do, which in fact was like incredibly useful to me as a documentary camera person. And I I would often do things like stand up before another person stood up who I was filming and start walking backwards before they even knew. Like I had one person stop me and said like, "How did you know I was going to get up?" I didn't know I was going to get up. But that kind of attention to what's coming next started in me as a little kid trying to beat God. So I love it that you're noticing that I found a way to be God and like get Jesus to do my bidding. Um, and the other thing I did, which I can't believe I did, was to turn the church into my playground, my personal theater. The audacity of that. But I definitely I was in church every Saturday of my childhood. I spent a lot of time imagining what I would do if I could go to the front of the church and be up on the platform. So that I've actually done it. Like, I was thinking of like, oh, I'm making my father's funeral, but that I I took control of the church. Um, Cracks me up. There's a garden behind our church, and we all planted trees and flowers there, and raised money to put the plants in. And I planted a katsura tree,
Mhm.
and someone told me recently that they had to tear the tree out because it had grown so large that it was breaking the foundation of the church.
Wow. Wow.
And I was like, that's my tree.
Wow. Wow. Um, just one more thing about playing God, and there it's not exactly a Last Supper, but there are guests at the table. You know, Freud, Buster Keaton, Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
How do you decide who to invite to the party, and what does that tell us about your dad or you or
Yeah.
how? Because that's a that's portraiture. You
Yeah.
know, that's
I invited some of my favorite people to the table who managed to transform their own personal pain into art or practice that is deeply meaningful to the rest of us. And Dad and I argued a lot about who got to come. He wanted a lot of his friends to be there. I was like, nobody will recognize them. And he's like, we were sort of trading, like, I'll take your Freud and your Farrah Fawcett for one Buster Keaton and one Frederick Douglass, you know? Um, it was really fun to choose those people. But for me, all of those people live on
Yeah,
because of their work.
sure, sure. No,
Um,
it's fun to decode, and you know it's again, there's so much playfulness and humor and detail in all of that, in this rather surreal, safe world that you've created for him. Um,
mm,
um, by the way, speaking of surreal and odd moments, there's a chair. He's lying in his apartment, and a
yeah.
chair rises up out of the frame.
Mm,
You know, that's
mm,
also like unexplained surprise. It's not threatening. It's rather
right.
serene, actually. But
Yeah.
it's a beautiful moment,
Mm,
unexpected and suggestive of so many things. You know,
yeah.
dying in one's sleep, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, it's just
Yeah,
another
I mean, I think there's so
film.
many things, there's so much ways in which a person with dementia just drifts away from you,
Yeah, yeah,
drifts away from the earth, becomes untethered from the earth, and there are ways in which, these things can be violent losses, but also sort of slow fades. And that chair has been the chair that my father has sat in as a psychiatrist and listened to so many stories. It's the chair where he's watched TV. It's the chair that he told me about his father's death. You know, and it goes on and on, all the things that he's experienced in that chair. And it sort of felt great, like, why can't the chair go with him? That he can go easy. Um,
I, I'm
shall
not.
we?
I'm not going to ask you how you did it, but I didn't see any strings.
No strings attached.
Yeah,
No strings
good,
attached. No,
good.
there's some mysteries that will remain mysterious, right?
So be it.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Alan, should we invite people to join us?
Yeah,
If
well,
anyone has any
someone has
questions?
asked a question. Someone in the audience named George is asking about what your brother, Kirk, thinks of the film,
Yeah,
and also why he's not involved as a primary character.
right. So my brother Kirk, I'm actually in his apartment right now, so he could be listening while I tell you this.
Could be in the
My,
next room. Yeah,
yeah,
anyway.
exactly. My brother is an extraordinary paleobotanist, and he runs the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. So he's a really busy person, for one. And when I first approached him with the idea of it, he laughed. And I said, I'd like to do a funeral at the church. And he said, oh, the church probably won't let you do that. And then I called him after I talked to the pastor and I said, the pastor's going to let me do that. And he
Yeah,
said, well, I doubt anyone's going to come. And I said, well, I'm going to write letters to people and invite them. And then I said, Kirk, there are 150 people coming. And he was like, oh, I guess I have to come. And I was like, I would love you to come. Um, but I think in many ways, one, like so many of us, my brother is busy with his own life, but also it is so hard to face the pain of losing the people we love. And I think in many ways, my brother he was not ready
hmm,
to grieve my father. And I was forcing him to look at it by making this film. And he was not ready to look at it. He gave me a really strong I had the impulse, I wanted to put my dad in the casket at the front of the church in the actual ceremony. And he was like, over my dead body. That's like the craziest, worst idea ever. And one of my operating principles with this film is I'm not in this alone. This is not my dad only. It's also my brother's dad. And he's also, friends to many people. He was a psychiatrist to many people. He has a reputation.
sure.
I have to consult all the people who love him about how this movie is made, and I don't want to do anything that will actively hurt someone. So I acquiesced to my brother's wish to not put him in the open casket, but then that gave us an idea. It was like, we're making a movie. We can shoot him in the open casket the day before the funeral, and we can green screen it into the scene. And it turned out it was such a better idea because everyone who experienced the funeral experienced it knowing dad was alive, but not seeing him. So it was much more like a funeral than it would have been if he had been up in the front, popping in and out of the casket, saying, "I can't hear you."
or moving a little or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But so
But
that was him up there, Alan, in the front when he was in the back, but he was also green screened.
yeah, gotcha. Well, it's just part of the sleight of hand.
Yeah,
It's things
yeah,
are not
it's
quite
a
what
total
they
magic
do,
trick.
but that's the point.
That's
The other thing is that your brother is moved to tears at the end of that farewell.
yeah,
You can see him, uh,
yeah,
drying the tears from his eyes. And also, because he doesn't have a lot of screen time, the few times we see him, then there's a shot in the at the end of the farewell where your arms around one another,
yeah,
with your dad and possibly imagine his partner.
yeah, yeah,
Nonetheless, so there's something. I mean, he's with it, but just not in a
yeah,
primary way. I
yeah.
remember.
And
Go
at
ahead.
a
I'm
certain
sorry.
point, I realized the film was about my relationship with dad. Like it was our relationship that was being played out through this experiment of a film together.
Yeah, yeah. There's a question from someone named Lee, if I may, who writes, and I'm quoting, "I'm planning on filming a road trip with my mom, going all around the 24 places in the UK where she lived as a child.
Oh,
You have
amazing.
great levity in your directorial features, so do you have any tips for me?"
Oh my God. One, so happy for you. You're doing that. That just sounds amazing. That's going to be such a great trip. I think the thing that you can relax and enjoy it. Uh, don't, don't, I guess it's like, don't force anything. Let your mom lead the way. Let your mom like experience what she doesn't expect to experience. Um, don't have an agenda for what it's going to be. Don't need something to happen because you're making a movie. Um, yeah. Oh, that sounds like such a great trip. I'm so happy for you that you're doing it.
Um, Another question from Steph. Kirsten, I love your films. This and Camera Person, thank you for speaking today. Watching Dick Johnson is Dead, I really felt that your comedic depictions of your dad's death suited his personality. But I couldn't imagine you giving your mom's descent into dementia a similar comedic treatment.
No
Did you
way.
add, or was there an element of making this film that helped you come to terms with your mom's illness and death as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was so deep. There was like a certain point where Nels, the editor I work with, Nels Bangerter, who's so extraordinary. Um, there was a certain point where he was like, "I think you just need to make another movie about your mother," and I was like, "No." And he would say like, "I think this movie is more about grieving your mom than it is about grieving your dad," and I'd just be like, "What?" Um, but there's no question, there's a difference in what was permitted with my mother and my father. And my mother was a very proud person, a very kind person, very intelligent person. But I think she wished to control her own image differently than my father, who was like, "Do whatever you want with my image. I trust you." I think my mother was very invested in aesthetics and in her presentation, and she would never have allowed it. And I feel like I've used that footage of her sort of against her will, that she would not have wanted to be depicted with dementia. And I have to own that, and it's painful to me, and it is also an act of love, but it's also an act of betrayal.
That's those kind of paradoxes and contradictions are part of life, but they sketch in important dimensions to your relationship to your father and your history and your family.
Yeah,
I mean, the fact that your mother died in a car accident in which she was in the car. I mean, that's you know,
yeah.
it's
She
just
witnessed something. She saw something
yeah,
that no one should have to see,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that affected her relationship to seeing and being seen. And it's affected, I think in many ways it's sort of the rosebud of my career,
yeah,
right? That I'm saying, look at this thing. We need to uncover this thing to reveal it. And I'm doing that in some ways against the prohibition of my mother, saying, don't look, only look at beautiful things. Don't look at that thing. And I think there's a real tension in us as humans and as citizens, right? What do we look at? What do we pretend we can't see? All of that.
Just another taboo, that you have to threshold of taboo that you have to
Hmm.
find your way across and through.
Yeah.
There's another question from someone named Andy. Your dad's best friend breaking down at the funeral, funeral is in quotation marks, it's hard to watch. Seemed like he was being ignored in the corner at the end of the scene. Was he? Is he okay?
Ray is wonderful. Ray's 91 years old. Ray was in on everything. He was there the day that we were doing Dad in the Casket, and he practiced his speech. And he said, I'm really going to go for it tomorrow because this is it. He's like, I'm 91. We're not doing this again.
Mm.
And he's, who knows if I'm going to go before Dick does or Dick goes before I do, but I'm going for it. And then it was the wonderful cinematographer, John Foster, who had sort of empowered all the different camera people. Like, I was like, here's where you should be for covering this scene. But if you see anything that you want to film, go for it. And John Ray thought he was out of view, and John sort of discovered him there and filmed him there. And, he's inconsolable. And I think that's what, like, losing someone you really love is. Like, no one can console you. And there's a way in which throughout the film, me and my dad console each other. We keep sort of laughing and it's sort of like Ray, Ray takes the hit for the team. Like, he shows us like there's no one to console you because the person you love is gone. And Ray came to Sundance and saw the premiere, and he was like, I made this movie. Without me, this movie is nothing. He's like, you two didn't go there. So he's really proud of his participation in the movie.
Right. Well, at the beginning of the film, when we meet him, he says something to the effect, well, I guess it's okay because it's a movie. He's not really dead, or, that he's suggesting. Yeah. But then in the final scene at the farewell, in which he's on, formally, he can't make that separation,
And that's what it is. I mean, that's what emotions are when they like come so unexpected. Like, why I'm in a rage because my daughter won't read the final, page in the chapter. Like, where does that come from? You don't know, but you can't control it. And, that's what I want this film to investigate, of like that sort of place where we're beyond ourselves, out of ourselves. That emotion takes us beyond what we thought we would do or be.
Yeah. Another question from Rosie.
Mm-hmm.
Dear Kirsten, thank you for the incredibly loving, moving, and resonant film. I'm curious to know if you watched your filmic imaginations of your dad's death back with him, and especially as a psychiatrist, understanding his progressive prognosis, if his reactions fed into their creation. Thank you.
Yeah, Rosie, you're so on it. We totally did that. He's watched the film many, 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 many times. And sometimes like he'd see a scene and he'd be like, no, that's not that funny. And like, that's how that we, the scene of him at the bottom of the stairs, that we like contorted his leg even more, added the blood, because he was like, that could be better. So, but like, for example, the scene with Marta, the caregiver, she and me and Dad had watched a cut of the movie, and then she was talking about how she felt about it. And I was like, can I go get the camera? And then I filmed that scene. So there's a constant interplay between the making the film. And Dad was like the freshest editor ever, because he would never remember that he'd seen a scene. And so he would be like, oh, that's interesting, but isn't that like, so he was like a perfect editor to sort of know what a scene was doing, because he was encountering it for the first time over and over again. Right. But yeah, he's actually in the home that he's in now. Everyone in the home has watched the film multiple times. The caregivers have shown it to their families. One caregiver told me this morning that her husband can finally understand what she does a little bit more. So I love the way the life of it keeps sort of flowing back and forth between people.
I mean, your father is, he's an eager participant. He's also a collaborator, In fact, in the opening scene, at the end, he says, did you get it? Did you get that, Mom? I mean, he wants to make sure you got the shot.
Totally. Yeah. Wiped out, and he wants to know whether I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always conceived of this as a collaboration with him, even knowing that dementia would impede certain parts of his capacity to collaborate. And like, how could I work with that? As opposed to say, like, once he has dementia, I can no longer communicate with him. I can no longer collaborate with him, which I think was what I saw you doing with Edwin in your film. Like, there was a real active back and forth. Alan, I often say this thing to people who haven't had children yet, or, some may never have children, but I say that phone call from the future, right? Like, you're telling me this now, but like in the future, you'll call and say, oh, I get what you were talking about. What do you know? What's your phone call from the future to me about what this film is going to do or be as time goes on, given that, how many years has it been since you made your film with your father?
Uh, almost 25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when did your father die?
He died, I made the film in 96. He died in 2001.
Uh-huh.
Uh, he died 3 weeks before September 11th. So that was a very intense
Whoa. Oh my goodness.
period
What
in my life. Yeah,
history, personal history and history crashing into you.
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the first thing I could say is that I hope your father stays healthy and lives
Yeah.
forever. You
Long
know,
may he live. Yes.
long may he live. Um, I could just say from personal experience that making Nobody's Business was indeed probably the biggest blessing. It was a gift my father gave me. You could say it was a gift
Yeah.
I gave him, but it was a gift we gave each other.
It was
And
a mitzvah.
yeah, well, okay. And the point is that when he actually died, my heart was heavy, but my head was clear. You know,
Mm,
I
mm,
had um, we had done something together.
mm.
In fact, it's funny because I call your father a collaborator and a participant, and he enjoys being a movie star and all the, and he got feted and celebrated. You know, I often wonder what was my father thinking about agreeing to help me make a film about him when he thought it was a crazy, stupid, I mean, to be blunt about it, stupid idea. And I thought, my father thinks that he's helping me with my homework.
Yeah.
After all these years, that's really what he's doing. He's
Yeah.
helping me with my homework, you know? And that was good enough. That's fine.
Yeah.
He's not going to walk away because I need his help to do my homework. And,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. But, you've given it's a gift to your father. Obviously it has the projections and the mirroring that goes on. It's a gift for you to hold on to. You'll be speaking about him and thinking about him with the film as you show it, and the film will live into the future in myriad ways. Um, and it's a kind of immortality that you've
Mm,
given him.
mm.
And um, you should. It's a blessing.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, it was not there's nothing, I can't even, I just want to be clear to everyone. Like, I made this out of need. And it's like a desperate attempt to keep him alive forever. Um, and I encourage, the woman who's going to go on the trip with your mom, like, I encourage everybody here in this moment of the pandemic to just imagine the person who comes to mind. If you said that sentence, blank is dead, who do you not want in that on that line? And just, ask them a question that you're afraid to ask them, or create a game to play with them, or record something. Because I think, Alan, what you say, I know it already to be true. I will never regret having made this film, and that I get to keep this film into the future, that my children get to have this film, is a gift.
and forgive me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but your children and wherever that leads to further and subsequent generations down the line,
Mm.
it's a home movie. One day it's just a home movie. This is how
Yep.
my mom or my great grandmother or what have this is, and my great great grandfather and so forth. That's how it works.
Yeah.
And
Wow,
so
I hadn't even got that far. I was like, I can only go to my kids. I can't get to the next generation. But okay, that's the phone call from the future.
yeah. Another question from Amelia. Thank you so much for opening up the general conversation on death and grief in this way. It seems
Mm.
strange that something we as humans all have in common is so taboo. My question is, have your kids seen the film? If not, at what point do you think they will see it, if ever?
Yeah, they've totally seen it. They also totally participated in it. They had lots of ideas about how to kill grandpa. They're really into playing with these ideas. Um, and I heard someone today say, we approach avoid things that we're afraid of and that we know will cause us pain. And it's like, of course, like, why wouldn't we want to avoid death? Why wouldn't we want to deny it? Why wouldn't we want to not talk about it? But it is true, we're all going to die. And that's a shocker. Like, when I started this project, I was an if I dyer. Like, if I die, you know, um, but it's so fun and crazy to think about. Like, how do you wish to die? Like, do you have a wish? Could you in some way enact that wish ahead of time? Do you, wish to do something with someone before they die? What is that? Can you do it? And I think we're also afraid of, like, making a mistake about these things, or sort of revealing a need, or being ashamed of something. And it's like, you try it and it doesn't quite work, well, then try it again. Like, this film was like a real back and forth between sort of failing, trying again, failing, trying again, because I knew it would be a failure. This film won't keep my father alive, it won't stop his dementia, and yet it does.
Uh, it does in a big way, in a very strong way. You know?
uh,
There are no more questions, at least, Sean, are there any more questions in the chat? Because I have another one for Kirsten. Um, I'll ask you the hardest, easiest question I can ask you.
Woo.
Okay. So,
Can't
yeah. Well, in other words, um, is there any question that you haven't been asked about the film so far that you're dying to answer?
hmm
Part of the show where you get to drive the car.
hmm well,
Something about the film that no one's ever asked you, or you're waiting to be asked, or
you
it could
know
be a career as well. Anything like that.
I I honestly am so convinced of my own blind spot that is so big, that I love when other people ask me questions or bring me new insight into what's happening. And I remember someone telling me that camera person was structured like Alzheimer's. Um, and I found that so profound. But you know, I think I'm curious about the ways that the film reveals that I am defended. Um, and I feel like the coronavirus pandemic is making me more aware of, like, why certain people need to be more defended than others. And it's making me more compassionate for that sort of need for self-protection. And so I'm just sort of constantly amazed by how we evolve as humans, how history evolves. Like, to hear you say that, like, your dad died right before 9/11, like, Alan, like, you could still make 6 movies about that moment in time, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
Um, so no, I'm not holding on to something that I wish someone would ask me, but I'm endlessly fascinated to have these conversations, because it's like, you see things I don't see.
Right.
And that's what I love about being in the world of filmmaking and sharing the movie with audiences, is like, the audience sees what I don't see. That's what I'm interested in.
That's when I talk to young filmmakers, I always say, if your film is showing anywhere, go.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, to sit in a room with people and watch your film, you can feel all the things you thought you were doing, you hope you were doing, you knew you were doing, you get this kind of feedback. You can read the silence in the room, you can read the agitation and all that. But the question and answer, the conversations afterwards, where you're forced to, not forced, not a good word, where where you get a chance
Get a
to,
chance. Yeah.
to speak, to think in real time.
Mm.
Just
That's
because
it.
we made a film, just because you make a film doesn't mean you understand it.
Yeah,
Doesn't
that's it.
so the
I worked one of the first films I ever worked on was Derrida by Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick.
yeah.
And Amy had been a student of Derrida's, and she, asked him all these extraordinary questions. but it was clear that he'd heard them before, and that they didn't make him think. He would say what he already knew.
Sure.
And then Kirby came one day and he said, it was the first day he was on set, and he sat down and he said, "What philosopher would be your mother?" And suddenly you could just see Derrida's eyes like going crazy, and you could see him thinking. And it was so exciting. And I just remember that moment of like, oh, why are we like, nobody wants to be explained to, nobody wants to be asked a question they've already heard. Like, go to that other place. What philosopher would be your mother, you know? So Alan, how do you wish to die?
Ah, well, let me just say, I've had two near-death experiences in my life thus far. When I was very quickly, when I was 10 years old, I was horsing around with an older cousin of mine in a pool, and he held me underwater
Mm,
for, let's just say, too long.
too
I was
long.
very close to blacking out, you know, and I thought in my 10-year-old mind, I thought it was over, and I was it was I was traumatized.
Mm.
By the way, I stayed away from that person
And did
for,
you ever swim again?
say again? No, I
Did
love
you
the
swim
water. I love the water, but that person
again?
was, and also in 2013, I was in Istanbul, Turkey during protests about Gezi Park, and I
Yeah.
was tear gassed.
Mm.
And when I ran away, when I ran from the tear gas, I kept, because they had fired it at different distances, I was running into the tear gas as
Oh,
well.
wow.
And I collapsed on the ground and I couldn't breathe. And I I thought, this is it. I didn't know if I had another gear, to get up and or is it all going to end right here, right now? Now, both of those incidents involve being unable to breathe,
Mm.
involve the lungs. And and I have some issues in my lung. I have asthma, I have nodules on my lungs. So I'm afraid about my lungs. Also, listen, both my parents had dementia too, as well. And
Mm.
so I worry about losing my memory. And, I worry about that too. But listen, I just would say, I'm not trying to cop out, but I'm also very superstitious. Very
So you don't
superstitious.
want to say.
Well, I don't even want to think of it, let alone say it, right? But I would just listen. I have longevity and brevity on both sides of my family, right?
Nice.
And so I'd be happy to die somewhere in the middle,
Mhm.
in my sleep,
Yeah.
as long as I, was able to work on one of my films or a project that day. That would make me very happy.
Uh, uh, Die doing what you love.
Yeah, that's and a lot of people die doing because they do what they love, right?
That's
So
right. That's so true. That's so true.
yeah,
Well, I I wish for you that in a long, long, long time from now,
yeah,
that you get to be doing what you love right before it's all over.
thank you.
Shall we
Uh,
be done? Shall it
uh,
be all over?
One more question, if
Okay, get it.
okay, yeah. This is from Regine. There were
Mhm.
different situations where you made the filming process visible, like recording the voiceover or putting the camera down to hug your dad. Did you plan this or did it just happen on the go?
We totally planned to include, like, the idea was sort of to play with cinema language as much as we possibly could, and to very much to show how we make things so that the audience would think more about what we're not seeing. And, that was a lot of what Camera Person was about for me, to say that, there's other people here, you can't see them, but we're in the image even though you can't see us. And I'm just really interested in, what is cinema, like, what is it doing, is it a hallucination, is it a time machine, like, what is it? And so to sort of crack it apart and break it and push the form and play with it, it was very much part of that investigation of trying to understand, what's the line between life and death, right? Like, um what's the line between the present and the future? Where is it? The elusiveness of all of that, we just wanted to sort of bend into as much as possible. So we were absolutely, letting all of that be revealed.
Right. Well, if we had another hour, we could talk about, we've only scratched the surface, mind you, but we could talk about, the interplay, the weaving of fiction and documentary, and how a lot of the film is, to the extent that you give us behind the scenes, there's a
Mm,
self-reflexive quality of, we see the film being made, we
yeah,
see the artifice, right?
yeah,
And then we see the results of the artifice.
yeah.
And that's both distancing, but it also brings us inside the storytelling.
Yeah. And I mean, I think these words, like, we're all working on what is the language we use for things. And documentary and fiction feels like weak as language, like we need more interesting language. And so, I thought of it as the experienced and the imagined. And, life is experienced, death is imagined. The present is experienced, the future is imagined. So I'm looking for all of those questions, right, Alan, to like, and that's what's so exciting about cinema language is it allows you to play in all of those territories.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of your intertitles, the plane going across the the sky.
And the title itself, the title is not true now, but it will be true. And the title imagines the moment in which it is true. My dad, like, I woke up like in a cold sweat with like a stomach hurting when I decided to call it that. And I was just like, I can't do that. Like, how can I do that? And Dad was like, nah, reaction formation. I'll stay alive forever if you name it that. But we made a mistake on a thing that we sent out to family members, and we just sent Dick Johnson is dead premiere, and two people wrote me back and they said Dick's died. So it's happening.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's part of the spirit of the film.
Yeah,
It's humorous, it's audacious, it's taboo, you know,
yeah. It's
but it's
triggering.
also, yeah, yeah, yeah. But
That's right.
then again, there are moments in the film that cannot be planned, that where he says, I'm your little brother, I need you, I'm your little brother who tags along behind you. I mean, those moments are true intimate moments between father and daughter. And
Well, none of the film was planned, really. You know, it was we created a process where the film would teach us how to make it,
yeah,
and we made it in response to the unexpected things that happened, because that's what the only thing you can do in response to dementia and to death itself. Oh, Alan, I'm so sorry that both of your parents had dementia. I'm
my mother's still with us, by the way.
Oh,
And
she is?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And by the way,
oh,
she was born in 1932, like your dad.
oh my gosh, that's
I
some.
wanted to go this far. So what month? What month?
Is she gonna watch the movie? What do you
Uh,
think?
no, my mother can't, doesn't, she's not able to do that. It's not,
Oh,
I'm sorry. But
I'm
what month
sorry
was your
too.
father born? What month was your father born?
He was October 2, 1932.
My mother's February. So yeah.
She's older. She's older by half.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm glad she's still alive, even though she can't watch movies. And
But this Groundhog Day all over again line in your film,
yeah,
that's, I have the same conversations with my mother every single day.
yeah.
You know, I
What's
can
what?
make her
What does
laugh.
she want to know?
Say again?
What does she want to know?
Well, I mean, I play her favorite music from my
Mm,
computer. We sing along.
mm,
I mean, there's just there are little tropes that we have. I know how to make her laugh,
uh-huh.
and I can make her laugh with the same lines every day.
Ah,
And
that's pretty
yeah,
satisfying. You're
yeah, oh
funny every
yeah,
day.
every day, every
That's
day.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
there's no memory that we've been there. Yeah.
Aw.
I'm talking about hundreds of times. You know.
Yeah. Well, I hear you because I've done it thousands. You've done it thousands too. Nobody knows how many times you've actually done it.
Right.
Oh, Ellen,
I
thank you so much for
My
doing
pleasure.
this.
Thank you. Thanks for being so forthcoming. Thanks for making the film. Um, Thanks for sharing this time with us. I hope, I'm sure I speak for everyone who's been watching that, your film has made a profound, a deep impression on us, given us a tremendous amount to think about. But in that joy, it's dark stuff, but in its playful spirit, it finds that, just that balance, that allows us to like go places we'd be afraid to go, you know,
Oh,
in our lives, in our relationship to death and to our families and so forth. So bravo.
Well,
Make
and
good
I
things
just want to
happen for
thank
this show.
everyone for helping keep my father alive forever. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate Bertha Dockhouse for keeping my father alive forever. Did
Okay, be well.
it.